Okay, we're on page 361. Okay, let's review the fundamental idea, which I ended with last time. The gray box, which has a blessing on a commandment, is typical of all of them. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to dwell in the sukkah. And I said that in grammar, right on the surface, there is an impossibility. You cannot write this not in English nor in Hebrew, but there's a contradiction in the grammar. What's the contradiction in the grammar?
You and his.
It starts off, blessed are you,
Second.
which is what we call second person reference. And then it continues with, sanctify us with his commandments. Should have been your commandments. That's in the English. The Hebrew is even worse because the verb sanctified us in the Hebrew is already third person. In English, you and he sanctify are the same. But in Hebrew, you and he sanctify are different. And already when you get to sanctify, you're in trouble. So there's a shift between second person and third person. And this is typical of rabbinic liturgy. As we will see, this is something which is almost universal, I would say. Now, what is the crucial logical distinction between second person and third person reference? Remember, this is second person, third person reference for the same item. In this case, it's God. Yeah.
Third person, they don't have to be present.
Right. Second person, you're addressing someone who's present. Third person, they do not have to be present. This leads to a double understanding of how God relates to us. In part, he reveals himself to us, and we understand. And in part, he transcends us, and he's beyond. We don't understand. And the shift in the person, in the blessing, in the reference to God, is meant to say that we are relating to God in both ways, in both guises. And I gave you a symbol of this in a certain word. This is a little harder. Which word that I should say carries this double idea? The word mitzvah. How does the word mitzvah carry this double idea? Because the last two letters of the word mitzvah, a vav and a hey, are the last two letters of God's most proper name. The proper name of God is the four-letter name Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. Last two letters are Vav Hey. That's the last two letters. The first two letters are Mem and Tzadi. And there is a coding having nothing to do with computers. And for me, that's important. This goes back to the Talmud and even before, called the Atbash coding. Atbash coding means you pair the first letter with the last letter, second letter with the next to last letter, Aleph with Tuf, Beis with Shin, Gimel with Resh. And when you look at a word, you can replace a letter with its Atbash coded pair. Now, if you do that with the Mem and Tzadi, which are the first two letters of mitzvah, the Mem is 10 from the end, which means it's coded with the Yud, which is 10 from the beginning. And the Tzadi is 5 from the end, which means it's coded with the Hey, which is 5 from the beginning. So the Mem and Tzadi are a coding of the first two letters of God's most proper name, the Yud and the Hey. So the word mitzvah portrays God's name half hidden and half revealed. The message then in the word is that when you do a mitzvah, you are relating to God in both ways. To God as the hidden source of everything, and to God who reveals himself in the world in a variety of ways. That was what we said last time. Now this, as I said, this is a ubiquitous part of rabbinic liturgy. And when you look at the subjects that are associated with these different references to God, these different pronominal references to God, you'll see that the subjects match the pronouns. In other words, when God is referred to in second person, you, the subject will be something where God reveals himself, experienced and understood. And when the reference to God is third person, then you'll see that the subject is something where God is transcended, hidden, and not understood. Now, to illustrate that, right here on 361, the paragraph directly above the gray square, this is the text of the Friday night Kiddush performance, What I want you to look at is in the second line, or is it the third line in English, it says, with love and favor gave us his holy Sabbath as a heritage. Now skip down to 3 lines before the bottom at the end of the line. And your holy Sabbath with love and favor did you give us as a heritage. So there you are, twice. Love and favor, holy Sabbath, heritage. Twice. It's a very short paragraph. And that whole string of ideas appears twice. There's only one difference between them. What difference is there?
Gave and give?
No. Now look, I prompted you. What difference is there between the top one and the bottom one? Yeah, the top one is his holy Sabbath, right?
Yeah.
And the bottom one is you gave us your holy Sabbath. Your holy Sabbath. The top one is he, and the bottom one is you.
How is it in Hebrew?
First of all, in the end of the first line, Asher Kiddeshanu. Kiddeshanu is who Kiddesh Otanu. זה כבר גוף שלישי. הוא קידש. לא אתה קידשת, הוא קידש. And after that, במצוותיו, אחר כך, בשבת, קודשו, קדוש שלו, ברצון, הנחילנו, זה הנחיל אותנו. הוא הנחיל אותנו. לא הנחלתנו, הנחלתו, זה היה גוף שני. הנחיל זה גוף שלישי. ברור? Okay. And at the bottom is the opposite. So now, already I'm priming you here. If you see a repeat, look carefully to make sure whether it's really a repeat. Our texts typically do not repeat. They're very short, very elliptical, very clipped. If it looks like a repeat, look more carefully. And often you'll see there's some detail which indicates that it's not really a repeat. Now let's look at the context. The top one, in the top one, what is the status of Shabbos? What is its character? What does it refer to? What does it symbolize? Look a little bit around the words that I told you. Tell me what is the focus of Shabbos in the first half of the paragraph.
The remembrance of the doings of Bereshit.
Right. It's the remembrance of the creation. Now let's see. Is the creation an event in which God reveals himself or hides himself?
Reveals.
Let's meditate first that no one observed it. Adam comes last. When he comes on the scene, it's all there. He doesn't see any creation. So there are no observers. Number two, does anyone understand how creation takes place? No. That's sealed in the Kabbalah. It's sealed in Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed. It's something which no human being can understand. So although there is a world, God's activity in making the world is something which was never observed and which is beyond our understanding. So that's a context in which God is hidden.
It's also revealed. It means both.
Okay, let me explain a little bit what I mean by revealed. Maybe this will help. There are people who say you can see God in the sunset. The sunset is so magnificent, so spectacular, you could just see him in the sunset. That's a fair way of speaking, but it presumes a whole background. It presumes already that the observer recognizes that there's a creator, and in the beauty of the sunset, sees God's activity. Imagine a person who doesn't recognize a creator. When he observes a sunset, will he be forced to acknowledge that this is the act of a creator? No. There's nothing in the sunset itself which would require an honest, objective observer to say that this is the activity of a creator. We have a world. The world exists. Nothing in the world demands, okay, the Big Bang is some help, but before that, nothing in the world that we see demands the acknowledgement of a creator. If you believe in a creator, you can marvel at the creation. But that's only because you believe in the creator beforehand. When I speak about being revealed, I mean in a way that an honest, objective observer couldn't deny it. As I say, the process of creation, were there observers observing the process of creation, that would be different. Maybe then they could testify that these things happen, and they happen in a way that's inexplicable, and so on and so on. There were no observers. And secondly, when we describe God as the creator of the universe, that's talking about a process that we don't understand. So I don't see God revealed to any objective, honest observer in the process of creation. That's what I mean by revealed, without necessity for a background. Now, in the second half of this paragraph, Shabbos shifts its reference. What happens to the reference of Shabbos in the second half of the paragraph?
Zohar L'Tziat Mitzrayim.
Yeah. It becomes a remembrance of Exodus from Egypt. Exodus from Egypt was revelation of God spectacularly. It was full of open miracles. Miracles that were predicted before they happened by his prophet. Miracles that had one purpose, and that was saving the Jewish people. An objective, honest observer would be compelled to see this as God's activity. There's no other way to interpret it. Now, maybe it may sound as if when I keep repeating objective and honest observer, I'm saying something obvious. It isn't really. There was a famous British philosopher in the mid-20th century named Alfred Jules Ayer, one of whose parents was Jewish. And at one time in his life, he said, if I had witnessed the Exodus or the revelation at Sinai, I would have then gone to the nearest psychiatrist because that would have been proven that I'm crazy. That's how far a person can be unobjective, not honest. Towards the end of his life, he changed his attitude. I was in London, he was in the 80s, and he had a near-death experience. And he experienced the various things that people do under those conditions. And when he came out of it, he said, I'm an empiricist. I believe in learning from experience. I never anticipated this. I have to rethink. Maybe I was wrong. I thought to myself, the guy's honest. He really is honest. But what he said before, had I experienced the Exodus or experienced the revelation at Sinai, I would have gone to the nearest psychiatrist. That would not have been true to empiricism. When you experience something that you can't explain, you just don't assume that you're crazy. You deal with it as best you can. See if other people experience the same thing. See if it happens over and over again. Investigate the way you would investigate any phenomenon. At any rate, here you see the two references, and you see that they are consistent with the context. That's what I want to show you. We together so far? Now let's take a look at Birkat Hamazon. I have a 185. Well, okay, that's the introductory psalms and so forth and so on. The actual text begins on 185. Now, I want to do the same analysis here. I just to warn you about one item which should not distract you. Openings and closings of blessings have a specific form. Baruch atah Hashem. Blessed are you, Hashem. That's true in every blessing. Whether the content of the blessing requires second-person reference to God, or whether a content of the blessing requires third-person reference to God, the formula, opening and closing, it should be subtracted. It's not relevant to the content of the blessing because it's universal. So don't be misled by that. Now, having said that, look at the paragraph, which is entitled First Blessing for the Nourishment at the bottom of the page, and tell me, what reference do you have to God in this paragraph?
Azan.
Okay. Is a gufza. Sheni or shlishi. Right? It's all he. Right? All the way through. He and his. The Baruch Atah at the beginning doesn't count. Right? The Baruch Atah at the end doesn't count. All the way through, it's he. Third person. Okay, now what's the subject matter? What is it talking about?
Nourishment systems.
Nourishment for all living things. How is that accomplished? How is that done? How do the living things on this planet get their nourishment? Yeah, but I mean, what produces food?
From creation.
What produces food in our world?
From the ground.
From the ground, from agriculture, from the wild growth of plants and fruits and so forth and so on. In other words, from the forces of nature. Someone observing the animals and plants on this globe, receiving their nourishment, would he be forced to acknowledge the existence of a creator who's doing it? Not at all. Not at all. Just a system of nature that works. So this is a system in which God is hidden. And that fits the third person reference. Third person reference where you don't see God in the system. So that fits very nicely. Okay, the first blessing fits. By the way, notice that in Kiddush, we started with third person and moved to second person. Here too, the first paragraph is third person. It's the same pattern. Okay, it's the same authors, but I'm showing you that the authors are consistent. Okay, next blessing. Now the next blessing is on 187 and over to the top half of 189. Go through it and tell me how God is referred to in this paragraph.
Second person.
This is a test of character.
An hour. Elohim.
No, but they'll be referring to God. He or you? Okay, this is a test of character.
At the end it says,
Ah.
the land which he gave you.
Good. It's not consistent. It's you up to the end. In the end, it says he. The test of character was: are you prepared to be thorough? Do you jump to conclusions? Are you prepared to look at every one of them before you answer? Right? Good. It's not consistent. Now I tell you that the he at the end doesn't count. Why doesn't it count?
Because it doesn't. It says Asher Natan Lach. How's that a?
Natan is guf shlishi. Who Natan? Lo ata natata. Who Natan? Lach is not relevant. That's relevant to you. That's a reference to us. We're talking about references to God. Why is that last T not relevant?
Oh, because it's a quote.
Bidiyuk.
Because it's a katuv.
It's a quote from a verse. I'm commenting on rabbinic usage. Rabbis didn't write those words. That's a quote from the Torah.
Does it indicate or just that from
No,
knowledge?
it says,
It's-
and as it is written, comma, v'chalta v'savata v'rachta t'vonai v'chal ha'aretz v'asher natan lach. And that's the end of the quote.
It even has a quotation, right? It's a single quote.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so fine. So it's really all second person. The rabbinic expression here is second person. What is it about? What is the blessing about? What are its subjects?
Egypt again.
What about Egypt?
He took us out of Egypt,
Us?
Took us out of Egypt and
giving us the Torah.
giving us the Torah.
Giving us food.
Sorry?
Providing food. Provision of food.
Yes, provision of food, but
Throughout the year.
yes, but you skipped something. What about giving us the land? It starts with giving us the land, then taking us out of Egypt, then giving us the Torah, right? Now, all three of those were spectacular, open miracles. All of them. God was more revealed in those processes than any other time before or since. And the provisions that it's referring to here are the provisions in the land. This blessing is, as it says in the very top in the capital letters, for the land. And the land came to us with that spectacular miracles. So the subject matter here is where God is open and revealed, and therefore the reference to God is second person. Now, that's enough. That parallels Kiddush. It starts with third person and moves to second person. In both cases, you had before the creation, and here you have the processes of nature in third person. There you had the exodus from Egypt. Here you had the exodus from Egypt, and the giving of the land, and the giving of the Torah. So you see parallel subjects and parallel concern. I'm going to finish the benching, but it now goes on to a further elaboration, which isn't directly the same, but if it's the same pattern reasonably well. What about the third blessing? This is in the middle of 189, and it really finishes with a pair of lines in the middle of 191. First of all, how is God referred to?
Our God.
Yeah, but is it our God he or our God you? The possessive is not the issue here. It could be either way. In other words, our God, he is wonderful. Our God, you are wonderful. The our doesn't tell me how I'm referring to him.
Your hand.
Second person.
Okay, your people, your city, your glory. right? You're anointed.
It's all.
It's all you.
Yeah.
But here, you could discard the whole thing. Look carefully at what's being said, and you should be able to see that the use of you could be totally non-significant in this paragraph.
We're asking, but he's not giving.
Bid we're petitioning. Please give is always second person. When you're asking someone to give, it's always second person. Please give, you're speaking to the person. All of it is petition. The whole paragraph is petition. So if someone wanted to say it's not relevant to the subject you're discussing, Rabbi, because it's forced by the grammar, I would be very sympathetic.
You can't ask his.
Sorry?
You can't ask he.
Yeah, I mean, please he do this. You're not. A petition is addressed to the person that you're petitioning.
So he's not revealed or hidden because he's not giving us anything.
No, that's not the issue. The issue is that the question of the subject matter doesn't arise. Because this reference to God as second person is forced. It's forced by the content of the speech. When am I going to say is it second person or third person? Where the content of the speech could go either way. I can say of God, you are great. I can say to God, he is great. Both are perfectly acceptable. That's a statement. That's a declaration. Declaration could go either second person or third person. Then when it's one way or the other way, I'm going to ask, why is it this way rather than that way? But a petition, give me, is second person by definition. Right? Give me means you give me. Right? It's always going to be second person. So therefore, just because I'm petitioning, whatever the subject matter happens to be, the fact that I'm petitioning means it's going to be forced to be second person. There's no option of making it into a third person. If there's no option of making it a third person, then I can't say, look, it's second person. What does that mean? What significance does it have? It doesn't have any significance. It's forced by the fact that you're making a petition. It's hard to explain this to you in English because in English there is no such. In English, you gave and he gave is exactly the same. But in Hebrew, atanotein, tatitain, vuyitain, they're different verbs. And here, it's forced to make it second person. You can't make it third person. It's only when you have a choice, you could ask, why was that choice exercised? And here there was no choice exercised at all. Still, the subject matter, I think, is relevant to second person. I'm doing some extra credit now. I'm not forced to do this. I could avoid it altogether. I think it is because when you talk about King David's life was replete with open miracles. You may have heard that he fought Goliath. When he came to fight Goliath, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid because when he was a shepherd, he had already, with his bare hands, killed a lion and a bear. So he said, so this guy did shlub, so what? Well, I'm not afraid of him. But how did he kill the lion and the bear? Because God helped him. So King David was someone whose life was filled with miracles. The temple is a place where miracles took place continuously. The Mishnah lists 10 miracles that took place. Visible miracles was the first temple. That took place.
Like what example?
For example, no matter how the wind was blowing, the smoke from the altar went straight up. The rain, it can rain in Jerusalem. Maybe you're not aware of that, but it can happen. And it can rain strongly. It never put out the water put out the fire. There were no flies. Now you were born into a world with screens. I remember when screens were invented, right? There used to be flies everywhere. You go to a butcher store with chopping up meat and blood, and so the flies were everywhere. No flies were ever observed in the temple precincts where the meat was butchered and prepared and burnt on the altar. Right? These are open miracles that anybody who walked in could see. So you're talking about the temple. You're talking about a place where God expressed himself in a visible fashion. You could see his activity in a visible fashion. So second person would belong here. Okay? Now the last blessing, this is complex. This is on page 191, the bottom paragraph. Tell me first of all, how is God referred to in this paragraph? Our is the possessive. Our does not determine how God is being referred to. I can speak of our God, you, and our God, he.
He. No, it's he.
He's reading the you from the formula open. Baruch atah.
Yeah.
Told you to skip that, right?
Yeah, he says he does
Yeah.
good. He will do
It's
good.
he all the way through.
Yeah.
It's he all the way through. Okay, now what is the
Yeah.
what is the subject matter?
His chesed.
Yes, chesed and Yeshua, salvation and help and sustaining and so forth and so on. Sorry, parnasah, right? But what you lack here is any specific historical reference. We pinned the references to God on, does it refer to the creation? Does it refer to Exodus? Does it refer to, this is so general, it refers to events of both kinds. Salvation, sometimes God's salvation comes through hidden means, and sometimes it comes through very visible means. Loving kindness, sometimes God's loving kindness is extraordinary, and sometimes things just work out, and it isn't visible. Here, it's so general that you could say anything you want. You could have had a mixture of you and he, could have been all you. It would be difficult to pin down because the reference is too vague. The reference is too general. Now let me tell you when this blessing was made, why it was made. And I think there's a lesson in it. When the Romans were conquering the Jewish people, which they did over a period of time, in fact, there were 3 great wars. The Romans won all of them, but the Jews didn't give up. So when after they lost the second war, another rebellion, they said, that's the end of this. We're not taking this anymore. They brought in legions from Britain, and they destroyed the army and destroyed the temple, and they destroyed various cities, very heavily populated cities, one of which was Beitar. And not only did they destroy the city and slaughter the inhabitants, but they made a decree that the bodies cannot be buried. And of course, for us, that's a tragedy. It's a horrible thing. And it took months, perhaps even years, I don't remember, of negotiations until the Romans gave permission to bury the dead. When the Jews went in to bury the dead, they found that the corpses had not decomposed. That's a miracle. So, this blessing, with this exquisite outpouring of praise to God, good, does good for all, every single day, did good, does good, will do good, bountiful, bountiful, forever, grace, kindness, mercy, relief, salvation, success, blessing, help, consolation, sustenance, support, mercy, life, peace, and all good things, because corpses didn't decompose. They were able to bury them whole.
This is why they wrote this blessing?
That's right. That's when it was written and why it was written. Of course, the reader thinks, but they did all die, didn't they? They were all slaughtered, weren't they? So, okay. The bodies didn't decompose. For us, that's a mitzvah to bury them whole. Very nice. And it is a miracle. But still, they did all die. Maybe this paragraph is a little one-sided or exaggerated to give such enormous praise for something which was really an immense tragedy. One answer here is that there are different ways that God hides himself in the world. And I think it's Parshat Nitzavim where God predicts disasters that will take place. One place it says, Astir Panai, I will hide my face. And the story afterwards says, Haster Astir Panai, a double hiddenness. And one way to explain single hiddenness versus double hiddenness is this. Sometimes things happen and you don't know why. You don't know why. You can tell who's doing it, but you don't know why. Can't figure out the purpose, can't figure out the justice. Sometimes the agent is so hidden that you can't even tell who's doing it. It looks just like happenstance. It looks like no one's in control. There's no purpose whatsoever, no guidance whatsoever. It just happens by accident. That's total abandonment. That is to say, you feel abandoned. The appearance of abandonment. That's much worse. That's much worse. You can remember as a child, there were times when your parents did things and you were seriously wondering why they were doing that. But your experience with your parents taught you that they usually had a reason. In the end, you came to understand the reason. And although it was difficult to take at the time, still, you didn't consider really running away from home and, or reporting them to the police. But there can be times when it appears to be total abandonment. There's no rhyme reason to it whatsoever. This is the introduction to the exile triggered by the Roman conquest. Something predicted in the chapter 28 of Deuteronomy, where, as the commentators point out, there's no limit set. There's no hint at the limit of that exile. This is the beginning of that exile. The Romans are conquering us. What kind of exile is it going to be? Single hiddenness or double hiddenness? Will there be opportunities for us to see that God is behind it, even though we can't fathom why and how, what the purpose is, how it will contribute constructively to our future? Or is he going to make it appear as if there's nothing there? No guidance whatsoever.
It's like the difference between Purim and this, where you could see God's face there.
I think that's right. You have to look, but that you can see. Ultimately, you can see. That's a nice observation. So here, when the corpses don't deteriorate, they're able to bury them whole. It's a signal that it will be long, it will be bitter, it will be difficult, but you will be able to tell that I'm behind it. You will be able to tell that I'm behind it. That means this, in the context of the tragedy of Beitar, it's a small thing, but it makes a qualitative difference. It makes a qualitative difference in the way you experience it.
And we can't
Wait a second. Let me just give an analogy, and then we discuss it if you like. How much light is shed by one candle? There are two ways to look at it, or two settings into which you can put this, and you can get different results. Consider the difference between 3 candles and 2 candles. That's a difference. Now compare it with the difference between 1 candle and 0 candles. 1 and 0 is gigantic. 0 is no light at all. 1 is there's light. Okay, it's faint light, but there's light. 3 and 2 is just a matter of intensity. It's not a qualitative difference. Here we're talking about a qualitative difference. The depths of Beitar, without any open expression of divine providence, would have been disastrous, would have been totally black. With this little hint, it becomes qualitatively different. Now, how are we going to describe this? We're going to describe this with a great outpouring of gratitude because of the difference between total blackness and blackness with a candle. But in referring to God, introducing an exile, which in the end lasted at least 1900 years, not to raise interesting issues, to introduce it with second person, to compare it with the exodus from Egypt, to compare it with the giving of the Torah, compare it with the receiving of the land, that would be going much too far. So the reference to God is third person, but it is an expression of gratitude for this one candle expression or revelation of his providence in that terrible context. Okay? So it can be worked in. I wouldn't say this is direct. I wouldn't say you could deduce it. I'm doing a lot of the work here, but it's not a problem. It's not problematic. Are we together? Now you wanted to remark? Yeah.
So how do we we can't justify why he did that. You could come up with all these rational thoughts.
I'll tell you, you're asking a question which is really quite deep. I'll just give you one thing to think about. When you talk about rationalizing or justifying something, there are 2 different questions you could ask. One is, are there any principles that make this possible? That's one question. The other is, what was the reason for it in this case? Let's say something bad happens. God is good, is all good, and something bad happens. Do we have any principles which could possibly explain how an all good God could do this? The answer is we have lots of them. We have lots of them.
Of course.
We believe that evil is real, and we believe that God does evil. So says Isaiah in an explicit verse. Borei Ra, God creates evil. And we have many principles that could explain the existence of evil in general terms. But if you ask me, okay, this person is suffering. Why is he suffering? What principles apply to his life? That's where we can't answer. We don't know in detail why this individual person is suffering the way he's suffering. So that means if someone wants to raise an objection, how could there be an all good God? If this happened, we can say, look, it could have been this, it could have been that, it could have been that. We have many principles which could have been, so you don't have an absolute contradiction. But if you ask me, okay, you say it could have been A, it could have been B, it could have been C, it could have been a combination. What was it? What was it really? Then I don't know. Then I typically don't know. So that's going to be the difficulty. Do we have principles that could explain it in general, in a possibility terms? Yes, we do.
I didn't know that.
Right, okay, so we have a whole study of that. If you want to look, one place where this is discussed, you can look at The Way of God by Luzzatto, Part 2, Chapters 2 and 3.
Tanakh?
The Way of God is a book, Derech Hashem, authored by Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. We have several copies here in the library. It comes in 4 parts. Part 2, Chapters 2 and 3, talk about this subject. And you can see a number of reasons there. There are other reasons. Actually, I have a chapter on that in my book. It's called The Informed Soul, which is visible there as a chapter on suffering there. Providence and suffering. So, if you want to see some other reasons, they're there as well.